So I wish what we could help women know is that you can trust your body, and she is talking to you and
Mm.
she wants you to listen to her. She is whispering, but if you won't listen to the whispers, she will start yelling to get your attention.
Hey, friend. If you grew up thinking sex was just about pleasing your partner, this episode is for you. And if no one taught you what your clitoris is, where it is, why it's hard to find, I'm using air quotes, let alone that it is a full internal structure made for your pleasure, buckle up. This is for every woman who's felt broken for not orgasming from PNV sex, for the caretakers among us who can't just flip the switch from wiping noses to feeling sexy, and for anyone in midlife wondering, what happened to my libido? Today, I am joined by Cindy Sharkey, registered nurse, public health sex educator who calls herself the lube fairy, and she is out here doing the Lord's work, teaching women the anatomy they have that they never learned, helping us untangle shame from sex, and handing out really practical, judgment-free tools for better sex and more pleasure at every age. In this episode, we talk about the truth about the clitoris and why most of us never learned it. Why arousal is not just like a light switch you can turn on and off, and how to actually get there. How midlife and menopause and mental load affect libido and what that means. What to do when sex is painful or boring or just not on your radar, and how to talk to your partner about what you need without it feeling awkward or loaded. And with Cindy, we get to do it with science and humor and zero shame. I'm Micah Larson, and this is the Modern Hysteria podcast, where we reveal the taboo truths of women's brains and bodies so we can heal and live without shame. If you like this episode, will you do me a favor? Rate it in your podcast app or leave me a comment, because I always want to know what you think, and that helps us reach more people like you. So now, if you are ready to be honest about your body, your pleasure, and your power, well, let's get into it.
I'm Cindy Sharkey, she, her. I'm an RN, BSN. I'm also a public health nurse. Right now, my job is sex ed. I've just devoted this part of my life to educating people about their bodies, sex, and pleasure.
You are really the right person to ask about the taboo we're covering today, which is pleasure and orgasm. And why do you think this is so taboo still?
I think there's a lot of silence around pleasure. When I speak to workshops or groups of people, especially women, I have people raise their hand if they got any sex ed. And then if they got any sex ed that included pleasure. Like I just spoke to a group about 75 last week. One woman raised her hand at a 75. So pleasure is not part of the conversation around our bodies. It's not part of the conversation around our lives. I think that's where it starts. There's a lot of mistruths we just swallow and ingest our whole life. And it's hard to unravel all that.
Absolutely. That was my experience too, being in public school in the Midwest in the 90s. The only sex ed was really don't get pregnant and don't get an STI. A lot of emphasis on the former.
That's pretty typical.
Okay, so that's what you're used to seeing, the people that you're teaching. How did you come to be so passionate about this particular subject, sexual pleasure?
You know, it's sort of funny. I came to it from working with women. I started out in nursing, in labor and delivery, helping moms through labor and birth and childbirth education and all of those things. And then I worked in OBGYN back office when the RNs in the back were running the show. The women, they talked to the nurse. And I found nobody had a lot of education about their bodies. A lot of them weren't experiencing pleasure. A lot of them didn't know what to do about that. A lot of them didn't have anyone to talk to about these things. And I had 3 daughters, so I had a lot of girls in my home growing up, besides my own 3, all of their friends, and I became mama shark. When they needed to learn how to put a tampon in, they came to my house. When they needed to use an STI med and they didn't know what to do, they came to my house. When they wanted to figure out birth control, they wanted to talk about it with someone, they came to my house. Nothing that would go over their parents, but just discussions. And we just had a lot of discussions. And I became very comfortable talking about bodies and sex and pleasure.
I have no doubt that you changed the course of those girls' lives. Obviously, your own daughters, but having a non-judgmental space with an adult who would answer questions, that is invaluable. And it's not something, obviously, we're getting from, at least what I have experienced, of public sex ed.
Yeah. There's a lot of shame around our bodies, sex, and pleasure. And so that creates space for silence. Shame is a really sad and dark way to sit with the things that you need education about. Shame lives in the dark. You know, it loves it there. You come to believe some of the things we hear from shame in the dark, and we need to bring them in the light.
I want to circle back to shame, especially as it's the antithesis of your book, Permission for Pleasure, which we can see behind you on the shelf, and maybe why we need permission. But first, I want to dive into one of the most misunderstood topics of sexual pleasure, which is the clitoris. The first time I ever heard that word, I was a senior in high school. A boy yelled it out as a joke during a standardized exam. And I was like, what is that? And the reason he yelled it out is because it was a joke. And like, we still see so many jokes in pop culture about not being able to find it and men not being able to find it. But women and people assigned female at birth often don't know what the clitoris is because of the shame. We just sit in silence and go with it. How do you think many women really understand the clitoris and its role in arousal?
No. I
And
don't think they understand the entire structure of the clitoris, period. I didn't even know I had a clitoris till college. So, hey, look at you.
look at me. Yes. Not that I like knew what to do with that information, but you have said before, there we go. I'm so glad you have a visual aid, Cindy. Thank you. We love a visual aid, so use them as much as possible. This is Micah with a quick aside, because if you cannot see Cindy's visual aids, I want to describe them to you. She's holding a purple silicone object. It is a clitoris. It looks like it could fit in your hand. It is an upside down Y shape, or maybe like a slingshot. And it's got these legs on it. And these are the parts of this organ that we often overlook or we don't even know about. Like, you have told me when we spoke before, you said the clitoris is known colloquially as a pleasure button. Why is that not correct?
Because all you can see externally is the glands, right? So here's the vulva, my little crocheted vulva.
Okay, now Cindy has this beautifully hand crocheted vulva, which shows the labia, which we'll talk about here in a second. When she flips it over, you can see a crocheted version of the internal structure of the clitoris. I think maybe this is what crochet was meant for.
And the clitoris, the only part you can see is the glands at the top and the hood, some of the hood. But the rest of the clitoris is inside. It has the glands that you can see on the outside, but it also has a shaft, 2 long legs, and 2 big bulbs. This is the whole structure of the clitoris. I pass these things around when I speak and do workshops because this is pretty reasonable size, actually, 3D size, and most women are shocked. No idea.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because, I mean, we tend to know that men's penis and testicles, like, they're visible, and we know that those are erotic. And what I didn't understand until I educated myself a bit is that female parts are so similar. They are just inside the pelvis. And that blew my mind.
Yes, we have the same amount of erectile tissue. It's just not all out in front. It's tucked underneath and under the surface. This is thousands of nerve endings and all erectile tissue. All of the clitoris, all the parts are erectile tissue, just like a penis has erectile tissue. It's the same, just organized differently. The only function that we know of for the clitoris is pleasure.
So it's for sensation. That's his whole job.
Its whole job, sensation and pleasure. Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of people literally don't know where it is located in their body.
Yep.
I mean, it's 2025 and people on the street interviews, if you've seen them, men are asked, can women pee with a tampon in it? And they're like, no.
How many tampons does a woman use during a period? 61, 42. I mean, like, no idea.
No idea. So can we set the record straight, Cindy? Like, what are we working with mechanically with your visual aid? What's the vulva, the labia, the clitoris?
Let's do it. This is my favorite.
Okay.
So this is your vulva. This is where we need to start, because if we keep calling everything the vagina, which is the canal here, the opening, we're missing a lot of parts. This is why educators like me are so focused on people calling the vulva a vulva, because we don't want to leave out the parts that everybody has to know.
Justice for vulvas.
This is your vulva, right? This, your vagina, everybody knows the vagina and the opening, and your anus is down here where your poo comes out. I talk like a nurse, but I'll use the terms everyone knows. Right up above the vagina is the urethra. That's where your pee comes out. And the clitoris is at the tip top of there. And then you have your inner labia and your outer labia, or your inner lips and your outer lips. And all of that's on the outside. On the inside is the rest of the clitoris behind your labia and behind your tissues. But all of that is accessible through arousal. All of the tissue is arousable. And I think there's so much focus on penis and vagina intercourse that we've lost the education around the vulva and all that's available to female bodies for pleasure.
Okay. I'm just having a mind-blowing moment, because it's like, okay, we have all this anatomy on a female body, but the only one that has name recognition is the vagina, because that's where the penis goes in. Mm-hmm. And so that's the one that's got like, is a household name. Mm-hmm. So much of our arousal comes from these other structures.
Just say one thing, because if someone's listening and they haven't heard this, we're going to put it right out here. I care about this a lot. So as you can see then, right? And we can talk about this more later, but as you can see then, P and V sex, intercourse, doesn't always what? If the glans clitoris is here, and it's the most sensitive for a lot of women. And you talked about it at the beginning, like, why can't anybody find it? Well, it's not that hard, really. But if we're all focused here, then we're not accessing here, and we may not giving ourselves time to access here. So all women that come to me and say, well, I can't orgasm from intercourse, I think something's wrong with me. Nothing's wrong with you, right? The majority of women do not orgasm with intercourse alone. Some do. Okay. Some do. And you're normal too, but the majority do not.
Okay, so if we are disregarding a lot of those essential pieces, if we're just like, sex is P and V, and pleasure him, but we're disregarding all of our own like anatomy and the building blocks for arousal, like, can you give us a beginner's guide to how do we actually access pleasure?
But let's start with the arousal piece, okay? Then we can talk about the pleasure piece, because there's a lot of weird stuff that people believe about pleasure, like you just mentioned, like it's for the male, or their pleasure is more important than mine. I have a whole entire exercise in my book. That's why I wrote the book. We think it's all about the next big position to learn or toy to try, and that is not what's going to bring freedom to women. It's untangling these roots that we have in our sexual garden that are choking our freedom.
Hmm.
And that work, oh, that is it. That is the route to freedom.
What are the tangling, choking roots?
A lot of what we're talking about. My pleasure
Mm.
doesn't matter. I don't need lube. I'm low desire. My body and how I look is going to dictate how I feel or don't feel pleasure. I need to perform. It should look this way. I should sound this way. I try to hit as many of the most frequent things I hear from women to investigate for themselves. When we do it for ourselves, we come to such a different place with wanting and pursuing pleasure. And it's so healthy. So
Mhm.
you talked about arousal, right? Let's go back to that because this is
'Kay.
such a huge piece. The female body does not experience arousal like you see in the movies. It's not a 5-minute jumpstart, perfectly aroused orgasm in 2 seconds. It just doesn't work that way for most women. Sometimes, yeah, but not typically. All of this tissue is erectile tissue. Arousal means increasing your blood flow to the tissues, letting the tissues swell, letting your nerve endings awake. And then I'm getting all excited telling you because it's so exciting what our bodies can do and how we can access that. And that's called the arousal ladder. I just find that people tend to think they're going to go from the bottom rung and jump up to the top rung without climbing the steps.
Arousal ladder is a very clear metaphor, so thank you for the visual.
Yes. And a lot of educators talk that way. That's not new, but it is a helpful way to think about it when we try to describe to a partner how we want to increase our arousal.
Okay, so we're going from the bottom rung. What do we do to move up the ladder?
Slow down, number one. Everyone's so rushed. And I think we forget that our brain is our most important sex organ, and we turn ourselves on and off with our brain. We need to have time to engage our brain, turn ourselves on. That's like your brake and accelerator.
Micah here again, because we're going to talk several times in this episode about Come As You Are, the surprising new science that will transform your sex life by Emily Nagoski, PhD. It demystifies literally your body parts, why you feel or do not feel like having sex, and how your body image, your mood, and trust might play into it. The dual control model we talk about in this episode is one of the most perspective changing things for me, and my results from the quiz in her book were very enlightening. I highly recommend it, and it is linked in the show notes.
Now, highly
Mhm.
recommend. And, she helped coin some of that with the accelerator and the brake. And it's really revolutionary when you can embrace that piece of knowing that you turn yourself on and you can and turn yourself off.
Okay, Cindy, we have to talk about the dual control model now
Okay.
because you said sexual accelerator, sexual brakes.
Mhm.
This is a reference to the dual control model described in Emily Nagoski's book, Come As You Are. What is the dual control model? What does the brake and accelerator mean? And how does this apply to the ladder of arousal?
Okay. So our brain has a two-part system. It's a sexual excitement and inhibition system, meaning we're always, even in our subconscious, scanning for sexually relevant stimuli. Your brain is thinking about whether that's something, but oh, it's not the time. So the breaks, right? So maybe you see your partner and they look hot and you're excited, and then you look over and there's your 5-year-old and you're like, okay, break, right? So that's, or say you're in a good space and you're alone and all the stars are aligned and you're like, accelerator, yes, that's a go. So we're always doing this toggling in our brain of stop and go. And as Emily clearly describes the research, women think their go button is always broken or faulty. That's one of the biggest things I hear. Cindy, I can't go. I can't turn on. I can't push it. And what we know from the research is that your brake will override your accelerator every time.
Mm.
So let's talk about that. Whatever is turning you off will override your on.
What things can be a stomp on the brake? Is it just like getting the ick? Is it trauma? What
All of
stops
those
the brake?
things. It can be
Okay.
really heavy breaks. Like trauma is a heavy break, certainly. And what we know, how many women have experienced sexual trauma. So that's always something to consider if that's pushing a break. And that's sort of like, to me, I always think of that as like a break that just stays there until those things can be investigated and worked through, right? But there's other things like, and I talk about this in my book, affection. So a lot of women really want, and men too, want more affection that does not lead to sex.
Interesting.
Okay. It's kind of like fills your tank of connection and intimacy that does not lead to sex. The big thing I hear from women is I can't just jump from, haven't talked to you in 3 days and we haven't even touched each other to let's have sex. I just can't. That's a break for me. Right. So lack of affection that doesn't lead to sex is a break for a lot of people. And I just call that out because we don't talk about that. So
Mhm.
when your partner comes and starts snuggling your neck and you're like not in that headspace, what does our bodies do?
Break.
It's kind of like you said, ick. It's just like, ugh, like I don't want to have sex right now. But if we could lean more into more affection that doesn't lead to sex, that's just building erotic energy and connection.
Mhm.
Anyway, that's one example, but it's a really common example, right? Mental load, huge. Huge mental load, right? I mean, I'm thinking about the stage you're in because you have littles, right?
Mhm.
When we have a running to-do list in our head and our mind cannot turn off, it is really hard to feel the sensations in our bodies when our mind is running off. If we cannot be present for the sex we're having, we're not going to feel the pleasure in the sex we're having.
Makes a lot of sense.
So a tangible example, you're in the middle of things with your partner and you look up and you see the light bulbs a little off and you thought, gosh, do we need a new light bulb? Meanwhile, they're touching you and you're engaging, but you're thinking about the light bulb and then you're like, we should get a new light. That wouldn't go with the paint though. Those are the kinds of things we don't think about, but that really do push the brake.
That totally makes sense. And we're carrying so much of the caregiving
Mm.
with us. I kind of ride with one foot on the brake all the time due to some past experiences. Something that pressed the accelerator for me is my husband in the last month started cooking dinner for the first time.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, whew, yeah, that does something for me. Did not anticipate it, but I was like, that is hot.
People call that shore play. Like it's just a funny way to say like, yeah, if you like do the whole, if you cook dinner and get the cleanup and if you have kids and if you get the kids in bed and I'm getting ready, then I can meet you. But if I'm doing all of that and then I'm supposed to just turn on, that's really difficult.
Mm.
And also that shared weight of all the chores.
And it's hard to switch gears from taking care of a small child to arousal.
So can I give you one practical tip for moms?
Please.
I call it transition time. This can be for any of us. Maybe you take care of your parents. Maybe your job is high powered and like you're on go until the minute you get home, whatever it is. I think if we took time for transition, we're much more ready to engage because we take off the mom hat or the caretaking or the employee or the employer hats and we go, oh, there you are. Hi.
Mhm.
Okay. We're here. And we just take a few minutes, like we dry brush our whole body, or we take a shower, we change clothes, we listen to one song and dance around the room, we do a meditation practice, whatever works for you. I just think we're selling ourselves short if we think with the pace of our lives, we can just flip that so quickly. It's hard to do.
Absolutely. I used to think like, what is wrong with me? Finished pumping breast milk, untangle myself from this thing that makes me look like a dairy cow. And then I'm like, okay, why am I not on the accelerator?
Mhm.
Didn't
Mhm.
work. It didn't work.
we're fed that kind of idea through media and culture that we should be able to do that. We got to quit shitting all over ourselves.
I really think that in the absence of hearing voices of people like you, Cindy, we fall back on pop culture or porn.
Terrible sex ed, right? That's why I worry for the young people. You're not getting good sex ed. When we keep silence around sex ed, then what do we get, right? The options are limited.
Yes. I'm wondering if we can tease apart a little bit desire and arousal.
Okay. Let's talk about desire. I don't know if you've talked about desire on the show. I listened to a few episodes, so you've had a little on here.
Yep.
Wasn't Lucy on?
Yes, that we talked about desire in her episode. Here, Cindy's referring to one of the top episodes of this podcast, season 1, episode 9, with Lucy Rowett, sexologist in Vienna, Austria. And we talk about what is libido? Why do we give ourselves such a hard time about having a low one? And why we should probably ditch that concept in the first place, and what it has to do with your people-pleasing tendencies. The link to that episode is in the show notes. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So desire is your motivation to have sex. What motivates you to have sex? That's your desire. Arousal is the process. It's your blood flow increasing, your nerve endings waking up, the tissues dilating and swelling. This is arousal. It's lubrication, the vaginal wall expanding, and it's your mind engaging, and maybe you're imagining things. All that is arousal. It's the warming up and the waking up. Desire is, why do you want to do it?
That's such an interesting question.
And there's a lot of reasons people want to do it.
Okay, I'm going to just list some off the top of my head and see if I'm hitting some of the correct answers, because it's your role as a wife. It's not a good reason to check a box, to make your partner happy, relax. What are the better reasons?
I appreciate you calling that out, because this is the big question for so many women. They say they have no desire. Cindy, I'm a low desire woman. My first question is, are you enjoying the sex you're having? Is the sex you're having worth wanting? If it's not, that's not a desire problem. That's a pleasure problem.
That is a distinction. And Lucy really drove home the difference between libido and desire, and that desire can be cultivated.
Did she talk about spontaneous and responsive and all of that?
Yes.
Totally listen to that episode then. Listeners, if you're listening to this and going, wait, what are you talking about? If you fleshed all that out with Lucy, then hit that one after this one.
Yes,
it's so key.
I will link it in the show notes so you can jump right back to that one and then continue here with Cindy. Desire and arousal. Let me repeat what I learned from you. Desire is the motivation to have sex. Arousal is like the ladder, the process. We can cultivate desire. How do we cultivate arousal? You said we need that transition time between caretaking tasks, intentionally to, like you gave some examples, to take a shower, step away maybe from like your role as a mom.
Yeah. Think about sex. When I meet with women for consults, they'll say, I don't even think about it. And I'm going to try to push the desire button. If desire isn't beckoning you on the shoulder, then what can you do to cultivate that? Mm-hmm. And the arousal piece is huge. Number one is slow down. Allow yourself time. The majority of women need 20 plus minutes for adequate arousal enough to reach orgasm. You can have levels of arousal, right? This is what people talk about with edging, where you're increasing arousal to the point of climax and then dialing back. And then you're increasing arousal to the point of climax and dialing back. What is this doing with edging?
Micah here with a quick note about climaxing. Climax means orgasm, or the point during sex or stimulation when your body reaches the highest level of pleasure. So your muscles, especially those in the pelvic area, contract rhythmically and your heart rate goes up and it can feel really intense or emotional. And everyone's experience is different. And some people feel waves of pleasure, some cry or laugh, and all of that is normal. Back to the episode.
Edging is trying to help you learn how to build your arousal to higher and higher heights before you go over the top or before you climax.
Yes, I'm thinking of it in terms of your metaphor of the ladder, how to climb up and down the ladder.
Well, it's kind of
Got
like
it.
climbing, and then you're like, oh, don't go all the way to the top. Can I get more rungs in before I get to the top? Because that is when you learn how to do that with your body and your mind, it is powerful.
It sounds like having more control over a process that sometimes has felt like you don't really have very much control over. And that's
Sure.
some of the listener questions address that.
Sure. I think another big piece for arousal is sensuality.
Ooh,
So
okay.
I am shocked. That is what I get the most feedback about from my book. Women are just not tapped into their sensuality. Sensuality is not sexuality. We are all sensual beings. Sensual is using our senses, what you see, taste, touch, smell, imagine, and then how you feel pleasure with those sensations. This is something I have cultivated in the last 10 years, and it is juicy. If you can learn to tap into your sensuality, how can I experience pleasure with my senses in my body? Where do I feel it in my body? What does it feel like? Give it a texture, give it a color. Let me give you an example in case you're listening to me going, what in the world is she saying? Okay, so say it's scent. Maybe you're a big scent person. Like when you walk by lavender, touch it, just thread it through your hands, bring it to your nose and smell it. And then think, I love that smell. Where do I feel that all the way down to my toes? That's yummy, you know? Or you're cutting a lemon and you like that tart and you smell it kind of, and oh, that gives me a zing kind of right up to the top of my head. These are the kinds of things that as we cultivate that, we can bring that into the bedroom in how we are feeling sensations, how we can engage with our bodies and pleasure through our senses. It is a beautiful thing.
It feels like one of the tools, kind of like mindfulness, that we use to be more in our bodies rather than in our heads. Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, you have to be present for the sex you're having, and our
Hmm.
brains are busy. So we're always going off. And then what do? Then we judge ourselves, and then we're not enjoying what we're doing. This happens in the bedroom all the time. So mindfulness practices are best started outside the bedroom where you say, oh, you're going off thinking about that. Come back, come back. Even if you and I are talking and you feel like, oh, I'm not really paying attention to what she's saying. Wait, let me come back. Let me pay attention. When we learn to do that outside the bedroom, we can bring it into the bedroom. Dr. Lori Brotto is the research guru on this. I hope you'll link to her book, Better Sex Through Mindfulness, if somebody really wants to have a deeper dive into that, because it is transformative for not only your life, but your sex life.
Listener, I am indeed linking to Dr. Lori Brotto's book in the show notes. She is a professor in the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at the University of British Columbia, and she's a registered psychologist in Canada. And her whole thing is that mindfulness improves sexual satisfaction. And most of the time, doctors don't get much training in treating sexual problems, even though sexual issues are like super common and often linked to other health or mental concerns. Viagra came out for the men in 1990s, but after like 15 years and billions of dollars, there's still no FDA approved drug for women's sexual dysfunction. So recently, researchers have started looking at mindfulness as a way to help, and some small studies suggest that learning mindfulness can improve women's sexual health, especially when there's like pain or anxiety or shame involved. But there's still a lot to learn. Dr. Lori Brotto has studied erotica, vibrators, fantasy, and in a 2022 research study titled Virtual Reality Erotica, Exploring General Presence, Sexual Presence, sexual arousal and sexual desire in women. 38 women watched erotic scenes in two ways: in 2D, like a regular video, and then with virtual reality. So it's like more immersive being inside the scene. And the scenes were shown from two angles: from first person, so from the woman's point of view, and then third person, or watching from outside. And here's what Dr. Brotto and her colleagues found. Virtual reality made women feel more present in the scenes, like they were really there. They felt more aroused using virtual reality, and first-person views boosted their sexual presence, desire for partnered sex, but not solo sex. Sexual arousal and feeling present were very strongly linked. So here's why this matters. This suggests that women respond to erotica that feels real and reflects their point of view. Virtual reality might help improve sex therapy tools for women, especially those dealing with like trauma, pain, or low desire. And female-focused erotica that's realistic and immersive could support research and real-world sexual health. So this is badass. Thanks, Dr. Brotto. Back to the episode. So we talked about the relationship between desire and arousal. And I think one of the periods of our lives where this comes to a head more is in menopause. If you're not as familiar with me, I am 33. I've been in surgical menopause for 2 years. I'm addressing some of these concerns 20 years earlier than I probably would have otherwise. The listener questions that I got were about libido, desire, menopause, and midlife. I'm wondering, Cindy, why does it seem like extra challenges enter the conversation around the point of midlife and menopause?
I think because our hormones are shifting and changing, and as we go through the transition, our estrogen is decreasing, our testosterone for sure. All our hormonal makeup is in shift. And that can affect how you feel about a lot of things, not just sex. I can't have a conversation like this and not say, you think it's all about the sex. You think it's all about the desire. And what I want to say is, are you taking care of kids? Are you taking care of aging parents? Do you have a medical issue with you or your partner? Did you just lose your dad? Did you have to move across the country? We have so much happening in our lives. And we think it's all about the sex and desire. But all of those things, especially at that stage, are affecting your desire. We don't have energy for sex. It's all in the same tank. If we think we're going to just want sex out of some separate energy tank, we are misleading ourselves. It comes from the same tank.
Okay, so that circles back to like we have to be pouring into ourselves with basic self-care. If we're depleted across the board, we're also depleted sexually. Cindy, I'm going to tell you something. I spent part of December in the mental hospital with a severe bout of recurrent depression. A lot of women, when they go through menopause, have increased anxiety and depression. Micah here with a quick aside, because I mentioned the connection between menopause and mental illness here. Does menopause make you depressed? Not exactly, but it can increase your risk. Here's what the research says. During menopause, so those years before your period completely stops, your hormone levels go up and down a lot, like an estrogen roller coaster. And this can mess with other brain chemicals that affect your mood, like serotonin and dopamine. And because of this, women are 2 to 4 times more likely to have symptoms of depression during perimenopause than before. If you've experienced depression, anxiety, or trauma in the past, you are even more at risk. And doctors often miss that link between menopause and mental health. And that means sometimes we're told it's just stress or normal aging and we don't get the resources we really need. I found that hormone replacement therapy after my surgical menopause has been enormously helpful, but there are a variety of therapies for this. Okay, back to the episode. One of the conversations I had not long before I started to slide into this mental breakdown was about my libido. I was just like beating myself up so much because I was like, my body just cannot do anything right. And my body's broken. Even though I knew rationally that that's
Mhm.
not the case, I still fall into the trap of thinking I'm not able to perform something.
First, I'm sorry that you went through that.
Thank you.
And I can see that you've learned some important things going
Yeah.
through that. Sucky that hard things are like that, isn't it? I wish what I had known is what I have figured out in the last 10 years, and I'm 60. Okay, so I wish what we could help women know is that you can trust your body, and she is talking to you, and
Mm,
she wants you to listen to her. She is whispering, but if you won't listen to the whispers, she will start yelling to get your attention.
boy, could that be the through line through every episode of this podcast, Cindy. I'm so glad you just said that.
I have the chills because this is so important. This is, and please, if you want to investigate, look into Hillary McBride's work or look into Sonia Renee Taylor's "The Body's Not the Body's Not an Apology." Just, but I am telling you, I have a whole chapter just on this because it has been transformative for me. As a nurse, I knew medically that people weren't listening to their bodies because by the time they got to me later, they waited for the screaming, right? If we could come back to really paying more attention to our bodies and what they're saying. I lost my husband unexpectedly this summer. He was the love of my life. And if I had not done the work that I have done in listening to my body over the last 10 years, I don't think I'd be waking up in the morning. I just would die in my sleep. But I'm taking care of her because she's walking me through this hell. And it is worth the work to talk to her and treat her like a friend instead of exercising her to death and starving her to death and berating her to death. This is where the freedom is. And I
It
want
really
it.
is.
I want it for all of us. I do. I wish I hadn't taken so long to listen.
It's so beautiful that you are getting all of us started on that journey so much further ahead. And like the criticism of our bodies is like a constant chatter for some of us. I think you put a real point on what happens if we let that take control instead of listening to our bodies. Thank you for sharing that with me. It seems like often it takes trauma or huge challenges for us to start listening.
This goes back to what I said and why I wrote my book the way I did. Because it isn't all about the sex. And I'm a big lover of sex. I mean, I teach sex, these fundamental things around our body and our sensuality and how we talk to ourselves and how we see our worthiness for pleasure, how we give ourselves permission to be delighted and to experience pleasure because we're worth it. These are the things that will help you more than the next big position or hanging from the rafters. So that's all
Yes.
good too.
Yes. So just having a baseline respect and believing that our bodies are worth taking the time to do those basic things that give us, like, not just running on fumes all the time. So, listener question, I would love some expert advice on how to keep libido up in midlife. What do I do when orgasms become less pleasurable with perimenopause, etc.? What do you take from that question?
I get questions around changes to orgasm a lot, especially post menopause. We could have a whole conversation just on this, but let's get a little practical. If you feel like you're having symptoms that is affecting your sexuality, that's affecting your orgasms, or all the other things, the brain fog and the vaginal dryness, and I mean, we could go on and on and on, anxiety, all of these things that can come in this season of change of hormones, right? I really encourage you to find a menopause certified GYN or a Urogyne who's has menopause training. This is big, that can talk through hormone replacement if it's appropriate for you and your health, or vaginal estrogen, which is not systemic, it's topical and it's to the vagina and the vulva. Just remember, and this is your nurse tip, your hormones being tested are what they look like that day, on that month, in that hour only. This is the truth. Okay, let's get practical. More arousal brings change to orgasm, because the more erectile tissue and arousal you experience, usually the more intense the orgasm. In this stage of life, when your hormones are decreasing, lube is your friend. Your lubrication changes throughout your life. I just cannot believe the amount of people who have never tried a lubricant for sex. If you're experiencing dryness, or if you're like you're having sex with Edward Scissorhands, that's what that example I used in my book. I'm dating myself here, but listen, this is not okay. This is not normal. Painful sex is not normal. So every week I talk to women who are like, wait, I just thought that was how it's supposed to be. I'm like, no, it is not just supposed to be. So if the issue is dryness and you aren't using a lubricant for sex, that's a must, a good lubricant for sex. Okay. I give lots of examples in my book. I have it on my blog. Anywhere you want to know. They call me the lube fairy. Listen, lubricant for sex decreases friction. When there's too much friction, you're going to experience pain. The next thing is sex at night is when your hormones are at their worst. So if your hormones are shifting, think about sex in the morning. That's when your hormones are at their best, especially male bodies. So keep that in mind. You have the most energy. You're not like dying to go to sleep. Sex after exercise helps, especially in this stage. You already have your blood flow going, meaning your genitals too. It can help jumpstart your arousal because of your blood flow. So try after exercise. The last one is everyone wants to have sex after their date night. Now, appetizer, not dessert. If you wait till after at the end of your date night, all your blood flow is going to your digestion, right? You want it to all go to your genitals. So think appetizer rather than dessert.
Cindy, that was a heavy hitter list of practical advice. You answered the second listener question, which is how can we make sex less painful during menopause? And you said lube, make sure that the blood flow is going to, and you showed us the internal anatomy. All of those parts need to be aroused
and positioning
to have good sex.
Yes, and positioning, especially in this stage too. A lot of times people just aren't thinking about how easy it could be if they just put a pillow under their rear end, or start trying, sex in a chair, or just change it a little bit. Sometimes it only takes a 4% change to really make a difference, because you shouldn't be experiencing pain. If you're experiencing pain also with depth of penetration, then look into the O-nut rings. I wish I had mine out to show you right now, but they're little rings. They're sets of 3, and they can go over the penetrating part to control depth if that's an issue. All right, I'm getting really practical here, but
no, that's great. You're actually the second guest expert who has recommended the O-nut. I'm going to have a bunch of links to these. We love practical, Cindy, because I want listeners to be like, okay, here's something I can do to respect my body more and pay more attention to my needs.
Yes.
Okay, so how can we start educating our partners about these things that we're learning? Like maybe they're not listening to podcasts like this. Maybe your partner's not reading Cindy's book, Come As You Are, like any of these things. So how do you suggest listeners start communicating their needs?
I mean, the research is pretty clear too, that communication is one of the biggest things that's going to bring you to good sex. And the couples that are describing having extraordinary sex, Peggy Klein-Platz's research, are over 50. And one of the reasons is they've learned to communicate about sex.
Okay, so after I recorded this episode with Cindy, I looked up Dr. Peggy Klein-Platz. She is a Canadian clinical psychologist and sexologist who's published a lot of research. For example, one fascinating study included 44 people who reported having great sex and 20 sex therapists, and they developed a model of the 8 major components of optimal sexuality, or like a great sex life. Okay, here they are. Being present, connection, deep sexual and erotic intimacy, extraordinary communication, interpersonal risk-taking and exploration, authenticity, vulnerability, and transcendence. How do we get those things? I don't know where to start, but those are the keys to a great sex life. Okay, back to the episode.
We are not mind readers. And talking about sex is a learnable skill. Look at that. Just like everything else. If you're new and you have never talked about sex, it's going to be uncomfortable, right? And you have to lean into the uncomfortable at first. I use this example in the book because this was a gal that I worked with, and she was in her 50s, and her partner said, "Will you educate me about your body now?" Yes, please. This is so beautiful. She was pleased to be asked because it was a recognition that there was changes and evolving and that he wanted to understand more. And then she also asked him, "Tell me about you," because men change too. That's a beautiful way to start. If you're wanting more of a show and tell, mutual masturbation is super instructional. You can use it to show what you like, if that's something that you feel open to. We aren't mind readers. It is easier to learn to talk about sex than learn to read minds.
And the moment that you described, what a beautiful moment of vulnerability, saying like, can you just show me? Like, just tell me about your body. Because I'm thinking about like, what do we come into our relationships with as far as information about sex? A lot of us, we're pretty limited, or the information is wrong. So how does mutual masturbation, like, what does that look like? How is it practical for this topic?
I think the reason I bring it up is because if you are showing with your fingers, with your positioning, with your words as you do it, it can be really hot, but it also is instructional because you're showing what turns you on. You can do it in a way that is instructional like that. I'm a big proponent of how you can communicate with your own self-pleasure. When we self-pleasure, we learn our bodies. We learn what she likes. We learn what she doesn't like. We learn something new maybe, and then we can communicate that with the partner. So if you feel comfortable with masturbation, self-pleasure, self-touching, especially in that midlife stage or after a baby, I often just ask women, will you consider having a self-pleasure practice where you're learning your body anew so that you can communicate with your partner things that are new?
That makes so much sense. And what is your sense about most women's orientation towards masturbation?
I think that has shifted over the years, but there's still a lot of pushback. You only do what you're comfortable doing. I don't have an agenda for people, but I do find, because I work with women and over all these years, there can be a lot of self-understanding and self-acceptance if we self-pleasure and learn our body in that way. Sometimes it's the breakthrough that people need.
I love that you said after baby, like after starting menopause, because those feel like times when we have to relearn our bodies. Things look different, things feel different. Like we need different things. It feels very empowering. Okay, Cindy, I want to share with you a theory that I have. And what you said about like We need 20 minutes of arousal to let all those beautiful internal parts fully engorge. Feels like an
Yes.
aggressive word. Is that
Well,
a
no, but
appropriate word?
let's think penis.
Okay.
What does a penis do?
Engorge.
Well, it's like, why doesn't it equate?
It should.
Right.
It should.
Right.
So it takes like 20 minutes for optimal arousal. We don't usually give ourselves that much time. You said like we're rushed.
Right.
And I'm wondering, is this why people are so friggin' obsessed with the dragon sex romantasy books? Because I've talked about this with a lot of my girlfriends and we're like, are you
Oh, I'm
reading
so
it?
glad somebody
Okay.
just popped a question at a workshop I did last week. They're like, okay, now I'm reading this. Why do you think women are so drawn to that?
I have been dying to ask some of this question, so I'm glad our conversation came here. Like, what is the deal?
Not just reading, but audio erotica has skyrocketed. Dipsy, I talked to the gal who started Dipsy on my podcast. The reason she started the audio erotica was because of this exact thing.
Okay, if you're wondering what Dipsy is, it is an app of spicy audiobooks and romantic fiction where the female gaze is always front and center. The female gaze is the way that women purportedly see and tell stories, especially in books and TV and movies and art. And for a long time, most stories have been told through the male gaze, where women are like objects of beauty and desire and not full, real people. And the female gaze flips that. It focuses on what women feel and want and experience and not just how they look. And it shows women as complex beings with thoughts and emotions and power. Dipsy is about shifting the focus from like, how do others see her to what is she experiencing? And this is safe and empowering. And if you want to try it, you can find Dipsy in your Apple App Store or on Google Play.
Women really use their imagination and fantasy more than people talk about. And erotica and fantasy bring our imagination, our sensuality into engaging with erotic material that makes us think about sex. And then where do we feel that in our body? It brings arousal. Even if it's arousal that does lead to sex right then, your body's still saying, hey, remember, that feels hot. And then you think about it. And when you're thinking about it, you start to decide if you're going to desire, you're going to pursue pleasure, motivation to have sex.
All the pieces came together.
That's my
Totally.
favorite. Lori Brotto, she talks about mindfulness. She's a researcher I really respect. She said erotica, fantasy, and vibrators are the three things in her study for desire with women that were some of the top things. The research shows that women who use specific words, right? Specific words for how they want to be pleasured differently are 6 times more likely to be sexually satisfied. And they studied 1,000 women that simply being comfortable saying the word clitoris, your pleasure network, your pleasure center, is linked to better sex. We're reading erotica and we're listening to erotica, and this is exploding because what is it doing? It's giving language to women.
Micah here with a quick aside. What do we know about women's arousal and erotica? First, we know women often experience responsive desire, where arousal follows like external stimuli or emotional connection rather than just like arising spontaneously. We talk about this in season 1, episode 9 with Lucy Rowett. Second, women's sexual desire is more influenced by external factors like relationship dynamics, emotional intimacy, and like the context compared to men. So the tropes of erotica and romance and romantasy books that are so popular right now may reflect that context, like the slow burn, enemies to lovers. We also know written erotica, which emphasizes like emotional context and narrative, aligns with many women's arousal patterns, which gives like a more satisfying experience than just visual pornography. And finally, engaging with erotica is shown to have mental health benefits, including stress reduction and aiding in trauma recovery for women, because it provides a safe place to explore desire and fantasies. Okay, back to the episode.
All this heated buildup in these stories, right? All this buildup. Does this ring true, you think?
Yeah, that just blew my mind. Absolutely. Because, so I've read ACOTAR, Crown of Thorns and Roses, and like, you're reading it without a goal.
Yeah.
I think talking to my girlfriends about like, they listen to it on their AirPods when they're just folding laundry or they're at the grocery store or something. It's like, this isn't goal directed. This is just for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a huge element of that too.
And you can use it as a communication tool. I have couples who read the spicy parts out loud to each other. Actually, I make him read me the spicy parts. I love that for you. Also, people act out, get the language and ideas, and have fun with role play or enacting what they read. This is just fun and play in the bedroom. Everything doesn't have to be so serious all the time.
Oh, Cindy, yes.
Could have a little
100%.
more fun.
Yeah. Okay, so I see like the smut, romantasy, erotica, whatever. The 50 Shades of Grey of it all is like a bridge that helps us get over some of our...
Mm-hmm.
Is that fair?
I do think for a lot of people it is. And it can be an avenue for some people. That's not for everybody. Just like some people, their imagination is like, I need to see sight, right? We're all different. In the communication piece, if you want to change some things in your sex life, or say you heard like 10 things here with us chatting, don't bring the whole bucket to your partner tonight. Just pick one thing at a time to talk about, not when you're having sex. Outside the bedroom, when you're walking around the block with the dog, then hold hands and say, I heard some interesting stuff on a podcast. I was listening to this nurse talk, and she actually suggested using lube. I was thinking, I'm really interested in trying that. How do you feel about that? Have you heard much about lube? Listen to an episode, a little quickie episode together, and then talk about it. One topic at a time, outside the bedroom, unless it's consent or pain, outside the bedroom. And you lean into the uncomfortable. It is worth your sexual satisfaction and your relationship satisfaction. And that's the science.
I love that you also gave that caveat about consent and pain. I just interviewed Rachel Gelman, who is a pelvic floor therapist, about painful intercourse. And she said something similar, like, have the conversation with your clothes on. And we were talking about using podcasts like this as a scapegoat or like an intro to the conversation. Okay, quick shout out to season 1, episode 21, where I interviewed pelvic floor therapist and sexuality counselor Rachel Gelman. We talked about the reasons sex can be painful, why we continue to do it anyway, and what we can do about it. Okay, back to the episode. Being like, I heard on this podcast, and I want to say, listeners, again, I'm always down to be your scapegoat. Say, this lady on the internet, she's yapping. Okay, Cindy too, like, we're your scapegoats. Just say, this bitch told me about lube. And then, there you go. Happy to be the segue in that conversation. Cindy, we have one more question, and that is, what is in your bag? We've seen your crocheted vulva.
Well, I'm carrying around my vulva bag, right, with vulvas on it. But I'm older, so I really have a small bag now. I don't carry around anything heavy. And you're going to laugh, but I always have lube samples. Uber Lube is the one that sends me so many samples. This is a silicone lube that I think is really quality. And I'm like the lube fairy, so I sprinkle it around like party favors everywhere I go. I usually have some kind of lipstick because I lost my husband, and, over 4 decades we were in a relationship, and I don't get ready like this every day right now. So I try to keep lipstick so I look like I'm still here, and I always have a handkerchief because I cry every day. I also have a pencil because I'm known to like put my hair up and twirl it around and hold it with a pencil all the time.
She's an icon. Grief comes in waves. I love that you're prepared with a handkerchief.
All the time.
Cindy, thank you for so many things, for teaching and sharing and being vulnerable and answering my questions and listener questions. Where can listeners follow you All this will be linked in the show notes, but where would you suggest that people jump on board with you?
You can find everything on my website, which is cindysharkey.com. I have a little weird spelling, so it's not shark like Jaws, but SCHARKEY. And you can find my book there. My podcast is Permission for Pleasure. My book is Permission for Pleasure. I am here to help you give yourself permission for pleasure.
Thank you. I think we need it often. Okay, friend, let's recap. Major takeaways from this episode. Your clitoris is not an on button. It is a whole organ made entirely for your pleasure, with a structure that is as complex and as powerful as the penis. Second, most women and those assigned female at birth don't orgasm from penetration alone. So if that's you, nothing's wrong with you. Third, arousal is a process, not a performance, and it deserves time and attention, not rushing. Fourth, sensuality is not frivolous. It can actually be like a portal to feeling present and feeling pleasure. And finally, communication is not just like a personality trait. It is a learned skill, and you don't have to be perfect, but we can just start. So our action items. Get curious about your own anatomy. Like, Google it or look it up. Look at a diagram. Experiment with transition time. So like try a short ritual like a shower or a playlist or 5 minutes of stillness before intimacy. Try a new lube. It might be a game changer. And if sex is painful, don't push through. More on that in season 1, episode 21. And maybe most important, we can reflect on this. Is the sex I'm having worth wanting? And if not, maybe it's not a desire problem. It's a pleasure problem. Boom. Okay, so you're not broken. You're not behind. We deserve to feel good in and about our bodies. So if this episode got you thinking, I want to hear from you. Share this with a friend, leave a comment, leave a star review on Modern Hysteria on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And don't forget to check out the show notes for links to Cindy's book and her podcast, both called Permission for Pleasure, and her Lube Fairy approved resources. The next week, join me for season 1, episode 24. It is the return of holistic therapist Megan Shearer, where we talk about the fawn response and what it has to do with our experiences with sex, and you will not want to miss it. In the meantime, again, subscribe, leave a review, and stay tuned because we are just getting started.